A quiet morning interrupted.
Green ink on walls, lipstick kisses on foreheads, a mother's love twisted into unspeakable darkness. It was a calm morning on April 15, 2013, in the quiet coastal town of Lowestoft, Suffolk. The rising sun bathed the rooftops in golden light, and the streets hummed with the gentle stirrings of a new day. But the peace was about to shatter, leaving the community in shock. On the top level of a multi-story car park, a cleaner noticed something unusual. A woman in a long white coat, pacing silently, clutching a teddy bear. She hummed a soft lullaby, her steps slow and deliberate. Before the cleaner could react, the woman climbed onto the railing and without hesitation leapt into the air, her lullaby fading into silence. Emergency responders arrived to find her lifeless body on the pavement below. Her pregnant form a grim testament to tragedy. On her arms and torso, 4 names were inked, a cryptic message that deepened the mystery. Who was this woman? What led her to such a desperate act? Investigators soon discovered that the answers lay miles away, inside her modest apartment. There, they would uncover a scene of unimaginable brutality, one that would turn their questions into far darker, more haunting truths. The horror was only beginning. A mother's secrets. The body of 23-year-old Fiona Anderson was just the beginning of a harrowing tragedy. The names inked on her skin hinted at a deeper horror, one that investigators were about to uncover. Fiona was more than a young woman, more than a mother of 3 with another child on the way. She had left behind 3 children, their whereabouts shrouded in chilling mystery. Detectives hurried to Fiona's address, a modest apartment in Lowestoft. From the outside, it appeared unremarkable, an ordinary home. But as they approached, an eerie stillness gripped the place. Repeated knocks went unanswered, and the officers were forced to break in. Inside, the air was cold and suffocating, as though the apartment itself held its breath. In the main bedroom, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. 3 small children lay side by side on the bed, tucked neatly under a blanket as though sleeping. Stuffed animals surrounded them, carefully arranged to provide comfort. Fiona's touch was unmistakable. Lipstick kisses on their foreheads and messages scrawled in green ink on their tiny bodies. "I love you." The walls told their own story, covered in hastily written messages. "I kept them safe. They'll never feel pain again." It was a macabre tableau of love, twisted into something unthinkable. The officers stood frozen, their training inadequate to shield them from the weight of what they had discovered. Forensics painted a grim picture. That morning, Fiona had drawn a bath. One by one, she submerged her children until they stopped moving, then gently dried them, dressed them, and laid them on the bed as if preparing them for eternal rest. The autopsy confirmed drowning as the cause of death, leaving a haunting question: why? How could a mother who had kissed her children and surrounded them with symbols of love commit such an act? For detectives, the answers lay within Fiona's fractured mind, a labyrinth of despair and delusion. To understand her actions, they would have to unravel the tangled story of her life, a life marred by love, betrayal, and a system that had failed her at every turn. A love turned sour. To unravel the depths of this tragedy, detectives delved into Fiona Anderson's life, piecing together the events that led to that unimaginable day. What emerged was a story of love, betrayal, and despair, starting with promise, but spiraling into destruction. Fiona met Craig McClelland in 2008. Bright and hopeful, she was drawn to Craig's charm despite his imperfections. Their relationship began with dreams of a future, but reality quickly proved less forgiving. By 2009, Fiona was pregnant with their first child, Lavina. The joyful news was overshadowed by financial instability, as Craig's inconsistent employment created a battleground of stress. Their struggles deepened when social services flagged concerns about Lavina's health. Hospitalized at 2 months old for severe malnutrition, she recovered under medical care, but authorities began monitoring the family. Fiona, insisting she was a good mother, bristled under the scrutiny. Over the years, the couple's situation deteriorated. Craig drifted between jobs, leaving Fiona to navigate the challenges of motherhood alone. By 2012, they had 3 children, Lavina, Addie, and Caden, and Fiona was pregnant again. The mounting pressures strained her fragile mental health. The breaking point came in March 2013. Craig, increasingly distant, admitted to having an affair with a woman he met at work. The betrayal shattered Fiona, confirming her suspicions about his late nights. Her devastation erupted into violence during their final confrontation. In a rage, Fiona stabbed Craig in the shoulder. Stunned and bleeding, Craig fled, covering the wound and calling an ambulance. At the hospital, he lied to medical staff, claiming a stranger attacked him, fearing social services would take the children if the truth emerged. Craig's decision to protect Fiona would prove tragically short-sighted. By shielding her, he unknowingly set the stage for what came next. That night, Fiona sent him a chilling text. "Say goodnight to the kids. You'll never see them again." Craig, consumed by anger and guilt, dismissed it as another emotional outburst and stayed at his new partner's home, unaware the message was a promise. Detectives soon realized Craig's role in the family's collapse was pivotal. While not the sole cause, his abandonment had been the final trigger in Fiona's downward spiral. As they pieced the story together, one troubling question loomed. Could Craig have done something, anything, to prevent this tragedy? The morning of April 15th, 2013. As the sun rose over Lowestoft, Fiona Anderson's final hours came into focus. Surveillance footage from a nearby hostel captured her leaving her apartment just before dawn, her movements deliberate yet haunting. She carried a small teddy bear, Caden's favorite, clutched tightly to her chest. Witnesses later described her as calm, almost serene. She wandered the streets, softly humming a lullaby. To an observer, she might have seemed like a young mother lost in thought, but her purpose was far darker. Fiona was not simply walking, she was preparing for an act that would scar the town forever. Around 6 a.m., Fiona arrived at Craig's new residence. She left a handwritten note in his mailbox, a mix of desperation and accusation. She expressed heartbreak over his betrayal, anger at his abandonment, and her belief that she and their children would be better off far from a world filled with pain. From there, she went to a local hostel, handing over the keys to her apartment with instructions for Craig to retrieve them later. The staff, unaware of the storm building within her, thought nothing of it. Fiona's movements became almost ritualistic. She walked through the town center, stopping at a park where she sat on a bench, clutching the teddy bear. Passers-by noticed her distant, peaceful demeanor, but didn't approach. By 8 a.m., she entered a multi-story parking garage. Security footage showed her ascending to the top floor, her steps steady and deliberate. She paused at the edge, gazing over the quiet town below. The teddy bear remained tightly in her grip. A cleaner nearby noticed her standing on the ledge and assumed she was enjoying the view. But as Fiona climbed onto the railing, humming her lullaby once more, the horrifying reality became clear. Before the cleaner could act, she stepped off the edge, plunging to her death. When emergency responders arrived, they found her broken body on the pavement, the teddy bear lying nearby, a tragic symbol of innocence lost. Written on her arms and torso were the names of her 3 children and her unborn baby. Investigators initially believed they were farewell notes, but the truth was far darker. Police turned their attention to Fiona's apartment. With every passing moment, their dread grew. When officers forced their way in, they found a scene so brutal and heartbreaking that even the most seasoned among them struggled to comprehend its horror. The apartment of nightmares. When officers forced their way into Fiona Anderson's apartment, the air inside felt suffocating. The flat was eerily silent, a silence that seemed to scream in their ears. What they were about to uncover would sear itself into their memories, a scene so haunting it defied comprehension. The walls were the first thing they noticed. Green marker messages were scrawled everywhere like desperate confessions etched into the home's fabric. "I love you. I'll keep you safe. They'll never feel pain again." Each word revealed the broken mind of a mother trying to justify the unthinkable. Then, in the main bedroom, They found them. 3 small children, Lavina, Addie, and Caden, lay side by side, tucked neatly under a blanket as though asleep. Their favorite stuffed animals surrounded them, and lipstick marks adorned their foreheads in a final, grotesque gesture of love. On their tiny torsos, Fiona had written their names, each accompanied by the words, "I love you," and a small heart. The officers froze, their training momentarily eclipsed by the sheer horror before them. Time seemed to stand still in that room, echoing with the weight of unimaginable loss. Forensics confirmed the grim truth. The children had not passed peacefully in their sleep. Fiona had drawn a bath that morning and, one by one, submerged her children in the water until their struggles ceased. She then dried their fragile bodies, dressed them, and arranged them on the bed, as if preparing them for eternal rest. In the kitchen bin, detectives discovered a torn letter in Fiona's handwriting. It was filled with anguish and regret, describing her belief that she could no longer protect her children in this world. She wrote of betrayal and despair, concluding with a chilling plea, "Please bury us together." The brutality of the scene left the officers reeling, but there was little time to process their shock. Fiona's death and the discovery of her children raised urgent questions. How had this tragedy been allowed to unfold? The family had been under the watch of social services for years. Why had no one intervened? Investigators combed through the apartment for clues, piecing together Fiona's final hours. It became clear this was not an impulsive act. Every detail, from the messages on the walls to the chilling precision of her actions, suggested a deeply troubled mind, carefully planning an escape she believed was the only option left. Neighbors provided more insights. One recalled hearing faint singing from the apartment the night before the tragedy. Another saw Fiona early that morning, pale and emotionless as she walked to the mailbox. The revelations painted a bleak picture, a woman spiraling into despair, driven by heartbreak, betrayal, and untreated mental illness. Yet the deeper detectives dug, the more unsettling the questions became. Could social services have done more? What role did Craig's actions play in her collapse? And most haunting of all, could any of this have been prevented? The investigation was only beginning, but the answers would be as disturbing as the tragedy itself. The investigation unfolds. The discovery of Fiona Anderson and her children shook the town of Lowestoft to its core. But for the detectives on the case, the nightmare was only beginning. As forensic teams examined the chilling crime scene, investigators turned their focus to uncovering the events leading to the tragedy. Their first step was piecing together Fiona's final hours. Surveillance footage from April 15th provided a haunting timeline. Fiona wandered the streets clutching Caden's teddy bear, left her apartment keys at a local hostel, and ultimately leapt from the top of a multi-story parking garage. These images spoke volumes about her fragile state of mind, but left many questions unanswered. Neighbors offered further insight into Fiona's isolation. One described seeing her days before the tragedy, sitting on the floor of her living room in a daze while her children played around her. Another recalled hearing faint arguments between Fiona and Craig McClelland, though the full extent of their troubles remained hidden. Craig was brought in for questioning that same day. He was visibly shaken, his demeanor oscillating between grief, shock, and defensiveness. He admitted to his affair, to leaving Fiona, and to their final confrontation during which she had stabbed him. "She loved those kids," he said repeatedly, his voice trembling. "She would never hurt them, not unless—" He stopped, unwilling or unable to complete the thought. For investigators, Craig's actions came under scrutiny. Why hadn't he reported the stabbing to authorities? Why had he ignored Fiona's chilling text message? And most critically, why had he left her alone with the children, knowing her mental state was so fragile? Social services also came under immediate review. Fiona and her children had been on their radar since 2009 after Lavina was hospitalized for malnutrition as an infant. Records revealed over 50 visits to the family home, with repeated concerns documented: insufficient food, poor living conditions, and Fiona's refusal to cooperate with social workers. Despite these red flags, the family remained together. A significant misstep was the assignment of Fiona's case to an inexperienced trainee social worker. Overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation, the worker failed to escalate the case to senior staff. Reports frequently mentioned Fiona's hostility and lack of cooperation, but no decisive action was taken. Craig's resistance to social services further complicated matters. He accused them of interference and destabilizing his family, making effective intervention even more challenging. Fiona's medical history added another layer to the tragedy. Flagged for mental health concerns as a teenager, she had refused therapy and psychiatric evaluations, insisting she could manage on her own. The overstretched system failed to follow up adequately, leaving her untreated and vulnerable as her circumstances worsened. As investigators delved deeper, a picture emerged of a young mother overwhelmed by betrayal, financial hardship, and untreated mental illness. She had fallen through the cracks of every safety net designed to protect her. But even as this narrative formed, another question lingered. Had Fiona truly acted alone? Forensic searches of her apartment revealed Craig's fingerprints and DNA, raising eyebrows when combined with Fiona's damning accusations in her final letter. "You pushed me to this," she wrote. "You left us with nothing. I hope you see what you've done." Detectives began to wonder if this was solely the result of one woman's descent into despair, or if there were other contributing factors. As the town of Lowestoft waited anxiously for answers, one thing became increasingly clear. The deeper detectives dug, the darker the story became. Shocking revelations. The investigation into Fiona Anderson's life took a shocking turn as detectives began unraveling hidden truths, buried grievances, and unanswered questions. Each piece of evidence painted an increasingly twisted and tragic picture of despair, betrayal, and systemic failure. Forensic teams meticulously reconstructed Fiona's final days. Her apartment revealed a chilling repository of despair. Messages scrawled on the walls spoke of love and anguish, while torn photographs of Craig, pieces of the children's artwork stained with tears, and Fiona's journal provided haunting insights into her deteriorating state of mind. Fiona's journal offered the most revealing glimpse into her thoughts. It chronicled her fears, insecurities, and a growing belief that she and her children were trapped in a world that offered no escape. One entry read, "They deserve better than this." Another chilling line stated, "If I can't save them here, I'll take them somewhere they'll never hurt again." Her words alternated between declarations of deep love for her children and resentment toward Craig, whose betrayal had fractured what little stability remained. As investigators sifted through the evidence, Craig's role in the tragedy came under closer scrutiny. Fiona's journal and final letters accused him of abandonment and manipulation. One particular entry stood out. "He knew I was breaking, he saw it, and still, he walked away." Under mounting pressure, Craig agreed to another interview. His demeanor had changed. He was defensive and evasive. When asked about Fiona's mental health, he admitted noticing changes. "She was moody, unpredictable," he said, "but she always snapped out of it. I thought she'd be fine." When questioned about the stabbing incident, Craig's response raised concerns. "I didn't want to make things worse by calling the police," he explained. "I thought it was just her lashing out." His admission painted him as either willfully negligent or hopelessly naive, raising questions about his culpability. Fiona's family further complicated the narrative. Her mother, Carrie, described the relationship as toxic. Craig broke her down. She adored him, but he treated her like she was nothing. When she needed him most, he wasn't there. These statements, coupled with Fiona's writings, cast Craig in an increasingly negative light. Meanwhile, social services faced intense scrutiny. Internal reviews revealed a damning pattern of missed opportunities. Despite repeated warnings about Fiona's mental health and the children's welfare, interventions were minimal. A trainee social worker assigned to the case admitted feeling overwhelmed and unsupported. "I flagged concerns, but nothing happened," the worker confessed. Public outrage grew as media coverage amplified these failures, painting a damning picture of neglect that left Fiona isolated and her children unprotected. Advocacy groups demanded answers. How had a family so clearly in crisis been allowed to fall through the cracks? The most startling revelations came from Fiona's final digital footprint. Investigators combed through her social media accounts, uncovering cryptic posts left just hours before her death. One post read, "They'll be safe now." Another chilling message stated, "He can't hurt us anymore." Even more disturbing were photos Fiona had uploaded of her children days before the tragedy. In these images, they smiled innocently, oblivious to the darkness that surrounded them. To many, the photos felt like a cruel juxtaposition. Images of joy taken just before unimaginable loss. The mounting evidence painted a grim picture, a mother spiraling into despair, a father whose actions may have exacerbated her breakdown, and a system that failed them all. As detectives closed in on the truth, one question lingered. Could this have been prevented? The system that failed. As Fiona Anderson's story unfolded, a devastating truth emerged. This tragedy was not solely born of one woman's despair. It was the culmination of betrayal, societal neglect, and systemic failures that allowed a fragile family to collapse. Social services were among the first to face scrutiny. Fiona's family had been flagged as at risk for years, beginning with her first child's hospitalization for malnutrition in 2009. Despite over 50 visits to the family home and numerous documented concerns, children left hungry, sleeping in strollers, or confined to playpens, no decisive action had been taken. Reports and recommendations seemed lost in a web of bureaucratic inertia. A glaring failure occurred when Fiona's case was assigned to an unqualified trainee social worker. Overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation, the worker failed to escalate the case to senior staff. "I didn't know how to handle someone like Fiona," the social worker admitted during an interview. Supervisors, aware of Fiona's hostility toward intervention, dismissed it as a routine challenge in child protection cases. The public response was swift and furious. Advocacy groups and commentators demanded accountability for the systemic failures. These children were crying out for help, one child welfare expert stated. And instead of stepping in, the system stood by and watched. Law enforcement was also criticized. Hours before Fiona's death, officers had visited her home to investigate her assault on Craig McClelland. Fiona refused them entry, claiming she hadn't seen Craig in weeks. Without a warrant, they left. Reflecting on the decision, one officer admitted, "We had no way of knowing what was happening behind those walls, but I'll carry the weight of not pushing harder for the rest of my life." Mental health services faced similar condemnation. Fiona's medical records revealed a long history of emotional instability, with referrals for psychiatric evaluation dating back to her teenage years. However, Fiona frequently refused treatment or failed to attend appointments. Professionals noted her deep mistrust of authority and reluctance to acknowledge her struggles, leaving her mental health issues largely untreated. Experts reviewing the case concluded that Fiona's declining mental health was compounded by her pregnancies, financial instability, and Craig's betrayal. Fiona wasn't inherently violent, a psychiatrist explained. She loved her children deeply, but became trapped in a distorted reality where she believed death was the only way to protect them. The tragedy inevitably raised questions about Craig's role. To some, he was a grieving father blindsided by Fiona's breakdown. To others, he was complicit, his abandonment a critical factor in her unraveling. Fiona's final letter and journal accused Craig of emotional neglect. "He made me feel invisible," she wrote, "like nothing I did mattered." Fiona's mother echoed these sentiments, stating, "He knew she was struggling, and instead of helping, he walked away." Craig, however, denied these accusations, claiming he had tried to support Fiona but could no longer endure the volatility. "She pushed everyone away," he said in an interview. "I stayed as long as I could, but I couldn't live like that anymore." The divide in public opinion was stark. Some viewed Craig as a victim of Fiona's actions, while others believed his choices contributed to the tragedy. Regardless, one fact remained. 4 innocent lives had been lost, and their deaths could have been prevented. The coroner's report was scathing. While Fiona bore ultimate responsibility for her children's deaths, Systemic failures were undeniable. The report called for sweeping reforms, including better training for social workers, improved mental health support for struggling parents, and greater accountability in child welfare cases. For Fiona's parents, these recommendations came too late. Devastated by the loss of their daughter and grandchildren, they pleaded for understanding. "She wasn't a monster," her mother said. "She was broken, and no one could fix her." Craig, too, was left to grapple with his grief. "I'll never stop blaming myself," he admitted tearfully. But blaming won't bring them back. The tragedy of Fiona Anderson and her children left an indelible scar on Lowestoft, a haunting reminder of the catastrophic consequences of neglect and inaction. It became a rallying cry for change, a call to ensure that no family in crisis is ever ignored again. A haunting legacy. The case of Fiona Anderson and her children stands as a devastating reminder of the fragility of human lives when systems fail to protect them. It is a story of love distorted by desperation, mental illness, and betrayal. A young mother overwhelmed by inner demons and an unrelenting world. Fiona was not a monster. She was a mother struggling against immense odds, believing she was saving her children from a life of pain. Craig McClellan's role remains complex. Whether a grieving father blindsided by tragedy, or a man whose absence contributed to Fiona's spiral. Perhaps he was both, flawed, human, and unprepared for the weight of his choices. The failures of social services, mental health care, and law enforcement are stark reminders of the cost of inaction. These systemic shortcomings, coupled with personal fractures, created a perfect storm that claimed 4 innocent lives: Lavina, Addie, Caden, and an unborn daughter. Their loss is an irreplaceable void, their names a haunting call for better care and vigilance. Could this tragedy have been prevented? While the answer may elude us, the responsibility to protect others from such fates remains. This story compels us to confront our failures and to act, ensuring no child suffers unseen, no parent struggles unheard, and no family falls through the cracks. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us for more real-life mysteries and untold tales. Your support keeps the stories coming. Thank you for being part of our journey.